general piece and give you an idea of what we're doing around decarbonisation and sustainability. So I'm a construction lawyer. If I go on to my slides first, I'll take you forward. So these will be going through what Matt will be covering, but I'm a construction lawyer by specialty, and I sit in the Osborne Clarke decarbonisation team, pursuing my interest in the built environment and hopefully helping to develop better, cleaner, healthier spaces to work, live, play and learn in. It's good to be here to talk about this topic today, the transition to decarbonisation in construction. And I'm going to go over a summary around the current context of climate change in construction. Obviously, there's a lot going on around it at the moment. A brief look at construction materials specifically and MMC with a view to optimizing design to help mitigate the effects of climate change, with a focus on the increased uptake of off-site manufacture and modular construction, with some insight into the key legal considerations to take on board if that's what you're pursuing on your projects. And then a summary of the key areas for action, in my view, and we will also take a look at what the greening up of construction contracts might look like going forward. So in terms of where we are then, along with numerous professional bodies, there's much going on in the sector. The UK government's commitment to build back better has been welcomed by the construction and indeed energy industries. But the shift to more low carbon construction and operation will require some significant investment and regulatory reform. As a post-COVID world hopefully edges ever closer, the government has demonstrated a focus on economic recovery, with priorities including the reduction of barriers for key infrastructure projects and a renewed focus on research and development. And while the details of the initiatives are still to be finalised, it's clear that both significant investment and clear policies are essential for the UK to meet its net zero targets. And I'll come on shortly onto what we mean by net zero targets in a bit more detail. Matt will go through in his section some of the recent developments around EPC mandating in terms of band C ratings by 2028. I'm going to leave Matt to talk about that when he delivers his section. But my focus today is generally on new build construction. I won't be looking at the retrofit aspect, but suffice to say that's a major area where existing building stock is going to be brought up to scratch to drive the zero carbon transition. Theresa May, one of her last actions was to sanction a legally binding net zero target by 2050 for the UK, based on recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. Environmentally positive goals and commitments are only growing in number, and a major catalyst stems from a large spotlight on the Earth's environment climbing up the global agenda over the last year in particular. I'm not sure if anyone's yet seen the David Attenborough documentary, the latest, A Life on Our Planet. It's quite extraordinary. I watched it last night, in fact. And quite shocking in part in terms of the rate of erosion of the natural environment and the likely consequences of not taking any action at all. I think unless we evolve wisely pretty quickly and learn how to grow and develop more sustainably, the consequences could be quite dooming. And I'm sure that documentary will serve as a witness statement, a valuable witness statement in the years ahead. This year's certainly made us stop and think in the face of extreme weather, forest fires, and the global pandemic. It really is a call to arms and asks, what is it that we can all do to help our planet? I think it's incumbent on all of us to do our bit, and if we're lucky enough to be involved in a sector that has an impact on the environment, then we really must make the most of the opportunity. So hopefully in 30 years we can feel a sense of collective achievement that we did make a difference. In terms of some context then in construction, the CBR research over the last few years shows that the UK built environment sector accounts for 40 to 45% of total UK carbon emissions. 72% of domestic emissions arise from space heating. Matt's going to talk about heating when he joins us, and the provision of hot water. 32% of landfill waste comes from construction and demolition of buildings, and quite shockingly, in my view, 13% of products delivered to construction sites are sent directly to landfill without even being used. There have been numerous climate change declarations made in recent time, including REBA and other professional bodies and groups of professional professionals in constructions. House builders are also setting out their net zero targets, but Barratt set out their own new bold targets to reduce carbon emissions in June. And not just builders, contractors and the supply chain, but investors are also have their own sustainability requirements. M&G Real Estate, for example, have committed to reaching net zero emissions across its entire property portfolio by 2050, in line with the government net zero target. So there's change happening throughout the cycle, as it were. And the IPCC has set a target of limiting the rising global temperature by to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. A further temperature rise of just 0.5 degree would have catastrophic impacts. And in terms of the key drivers then, in this background section for change in the industry, they are, in my view, the legally binding target net zero greenhouse gas emissions for 2050. Policy developments, we'll touch on those in a bit. Technology advances, so around data capture and evidence-based design and the use of the BIM software and performance data. Accountability in terms of the industry capitalizing on the opportunity and showing leadership to take accountability in the construction sector. And another interesting facet is ESG, which I'm sure some of you will have come across before, the enviro, social and governance factors that come into investment decisions. And I'll also touch on those briefly. The World Green Building Council, there's the UK Green Building Council, but the World Green Building Council has set bold targets. So by 2030, all new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have at least 40% less carbon embodied with significant upfront carbon reduction, and all new buildings are to be net zero operational carbon. By 2050, new buildings, infrastructure and renovations will have net zero embodied carbon, and all buildings, including existing buildings, must be net zero operational carbon. We'll have a look at the difference in those shortly. In a paper issued last year entitled Net Zero Carbon Buildings, a framework definition, the UK Green Building Council set out a number of steps towards delivering the bold targets, and the framework presented refers to two very useful definitions for net zero carbon, one for in-use operational energy and one for emissions from the construction process itself, which they say should be adopted by any organisation involved in the built environment that is serious about climate change. I can see Matt is back with us. Matt, shall I continue with my bit and we'll come back to yours at the end? Or would you like to, should we go back to yours and I can pick up where we've left?
Apologies, everybody. I had a technical issue just as the webinar was about to start. Huge apologies. If you've not got too far in, John, shall I loop back and do my bit, because it does contextualize some of this stuff, doesn't it? Which might be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm still on my background, so let's do that. If you, I'll take us back.
And I won't bother doing the introductions because I'm presuming that's all happened.
Yes. Here we go. Almost there, Matt.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. Again, huge apologies for the technical issue there. My name is Matt Germain. I'm a partner and head of the environment team at OC. Delighted to be speaking to you all this morning. In this session, we wanted to sort of look at the focus area is going to be looking at decarbonisation in construction, but as the title says, it is a little bit broader than that. And what we wanted to do with the beginning of the presentation was talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market around decarbonisation, some of the kind of market drivers and trends, and some of the kind of legal issues as well, with a little bit of a focus on the Environment Bill. That initial bit of the talk we will be quite short because, as I said, we wanted to get into the meat of it, which is the bit which John is doing. So if you just flip the slide over, John, thank you. Osborne Clarke, we're a large international law firm. You can look at that at your leisure, but I will move through that one at John given time. I think just going back a bit on decarbonisation, I think what's a really important point for us is that we've been a business which has been very focused on climate and decarbonisation for many years. We've had a a market-leading environment and renewables team for over 20 years. And we're now really shifting our focus to decarbonisation as a kind of mega trend, which sits at the top of our business and is relevant to indeed most of our clients, and particularly in this space, in the real estate sector. It has been a big issue for many years, but it's clearly coming into sharper focus. When I was talking to clients sort of 5 to 10 years ago about green leases, a lot of them looked at me aghast as to what the hell that was. Now, that is now becoming a little bit more mainstream, although actually on green leases we've still got a way to go there. So in terms of what we're seeing out in the market, and I think it contextualizes a lot of this stuff. I don't think there's any one clear thing which is bringing a lot of this agenda to a head. That there are a number of areas. Obviously, sitting above it all is the fact that we're in a world with a climate and ecological emergency. That goes without saying. That's a given. But I think if I was to pick one particular trend which we're seeing as a driver, it is the change in the position in the kind of finance community around how money is moving and being invested in sustainability. What we're seeing is definitely institutional investors seeing sustainable funds over traditional funds as a bit of a safe haven, and actually more of a preference in many respects, and actually assets and companies with a very strong sustainability profile proving to be a bit more resilient, particularly in the current downturn. And investment committees that we come into contact with are have ESG considerations at the very heart of a lot of their, whether it's project finance lending or traditional corporate lending. That those kind of criteria are very much here to stay. Whether that's EFG, whether that's UN sustainability goals, whether it's the Task Force for Climate Disclosure, all of those factors are now absolutely at the top table. I think the other thing which we're seeing is how our clients are understanding themselves as corporates. The role of the kind of corporate citizen has massively changed. Companies traditionally just being something which was there to deliver profit for shareholders. It's very much a company with its role in terms of its impact on the planet, and obviously how that's manifesting itself is strategies on net zero, which I'm sure most of the businesses you're connected with are already doing that, setting targets, and that's great to see. And that net zero transition is obviously fueling a lot of these kind of transformations. And obviously customer demand is huge, and we're seeing that at every levels of the activity we're in, and I'm sure within the PRS sector you are seeing that as well, whether that's from tenants or indeed any actors in the supply chains that you're involved with. Sustainability is becoming something that people are requiring and indeed demanding. The two sort of complete things that have come in from left field, which are disrupting things, is Brexit and COVID. Now, what Brexit is doing and has done, it is given the UK the opportunity to kind of reimagine its kind of legal position on sustainability and environmental law. The EU for years has acted as our kind of watchdog and kind of the big brother who's been prodding us to do all these kind of green things. With that out of the way, the UK has had to take some steps and is taking some steps to be a little bit bold and ambitious. Obviously, we've had the net zero target by 2050, and we've had some of the things I'm going to talk about with the Environment Bill coming up. It's actually perversely probably going to be quite a positive thing on the sustainability front, and it'll be very interesting to see in the current trade negotiations where we end up with this principle of environmental equivalence. So I think Brexit is clearly driving things, and obviously COVID, it goes without saying, you will all be aware of the recent announcements this week and right the way through the summer from the Chancellor and the PM around the green recovery and building back greener. Again, COVID is changing the perception of and indeed the relevance and importance of sustainability and environmental issues. So that's what we're seeing as the drivers. Just moving on, John, if you could, to what we're seeing out there in the market. and really some of the areas which we think from a legal point. I mean, I guess this is us, you know, operating in quite a fast-moving environment, and whether that's through you know, infrastructure projects, you know, clients doing all sorts of different things. But you know, looking in the kind of land and real estate world, energy efficiency is really coming up strong. And you know, the recent announcements about the Green Homes Grant and the public sector decarbonisation scheme are going to accelerate that. I mean, interestingly, they have got quite a short shelf life of 31st of March next year in terms of, you know, applying for that funding, albeit I was talking to someone yesterday and I understand that a lot of that funding is just going to roll over in different phases. But clearly that's going to kind of give that sector a bit of a kick. And if you could just go back, John.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know, and we're expecting energy efficiency schemes, whether that's coming from landlords, whether it's coming from tenants, or indeed coming from private sector ESCOs coming in to build, you know, and effectively operate an energy efficiency project on a savings model. I think that's something which we will see as an integral part of any kind of building development over the next 5 to 10 years. And similarly with district heat and power, that kind of decentralized arrangement is again something we're seeing a lot, and I think through the planning process that will drive more and more of that. You know, I think that will be, and we already are seeing that as a kind of fixed model on a lot of developments at the moment. Battery storage in terms of bolting onto renewable schemes is something else which is really coming through. And you know, now that the battery storage technology models have started to settle down a little bit, you know, we're seeing that becoming a lot more bankable and financeable. And again, I would expect to see the kind of the developments in the short-term future having a kind of a little energy park theme to them, where you've got different technologies providing on-site generation with some storage. Subsidy-free renewables is definitely here. A lot of this renewables projects we're currently working on are operating on a subsidy-free basis. The financial models are now able to react to that and deal with that. And obviously the price of a lot of these schemes have come down considerably and are continuing to fall. So that's another trend we're seeing. Power purchase agreements, that corporate power purchase agreements is something else which is really coming through, whether that's a private wire power purchase agreement or something called a sleeving arrangement, where you have got corporates looking to take not a direct power supply but an indirect one with an energy supplier in the middle, who are looking at, you know, large part to satisfy net zero ambitions. Again, that's something that we expect to see coming through very strongly in the sector you're in. And the final one is very interesting, and this is perhaps a little bit nascent, but actually I've probably had more conversations with clients in the last month or so around you know, investment models in preserving natural capital. So basically nature-based investment projects which can deliver a carbon offset. And I think again, it's a lot driven by corporates wanting to get to net zero. Obviously, once you've mitigated as much carbon as you can from your carbon emissions, you know, the quickest way to get to net zero is having a credible offset. So there are a lot of local authorities, there are a lot of cities, there are a lot of mayors who are very interested in not only issuing green bonds for this sort of thing, but delivering some kind of green open space which can serve also as an investment model to then raise funding for further kind of nature-based or other green infrastructure deployment. So I think a lot of the projects coming through may well have this kind of model integrated into them. Next one, John. So very quickly, a bit of law. The thing which is really also coming up strongly and will be over the next few months is effectively the UK is getting a brand new piece of environmental law. They don't come along very often. There's a bit of text there. It really is going to be something quite significant and ambitious, and there has been a lot of commentary that, well, it's not going to be, but our view is very different to that. It's probably going to be the most radical shake up of environmental law for a generation. And what the bill is going to do is effectively establish a new legal framework for us post-Brexit, because, as I said, most of our environmental law to date has been effectively driven through the EU, and with that gone, we need a new framework. So what the bill is going to provide is a new governance structure, but I think most telling, it's going to deliver a series of rolling long-term legally binding environmental targets for water, air quality, soils, and waste and resource efficiency. They are going to be policed by a principle of something called environmental principles. So there'll be effectively a management process built into the legislation to ensure that those targets are delivered. And most significantly, there's going to be a new environmental body called the Office for Environmental Protection, which is going to hold the government and public authorities to account for that. So that is effectively replacing the European Commission, which fulfilled that role for us. So that is going to be, sorry, John, if you could just flip on to the next slide, sorry.
Sure.
Some of these things I've just been talking about, that is what is coming through with it. So where is it at the moment? It's currently in the House of Commons at the committee stage, but it is something that's going to need to be delivered for Brexit, because this bill is part of the withdrawal agreement. Part of the withdrawal agreement was that we would effectively establish this new governance structure and this new environmental legislation, because simply after Brexit, we wouldn't have anything which we had before. So the plan is that this will come through in time for 1st January 2021. That is looking a little bit ambitious, but the government is still working on that basis. If you go to the next slide, please, John. Two things which I just wanted to flag in the Environment Bill, which I think is relevant for your sector and for real estate more widely, is, as I said, there's going to be legally binding targets on 4 key areas. One of them is air quality, and I think that will sharpen up quite quickly. We've got the government's clean air strategy from 2019, and we've got the development of local air quality action plans. These have been a bit half-baked in many cases, and actually the government has been taken to court in respect of some of that. But the new target, which is going to come through on fine particulate matter air quality, is going to come into force. It's going to be there for 15 years, and it is going to drive planning authorities quite hard. So you would expect to see, for new developments coming through, I would certainly expect to see some hard planning conditions. We're already seeing them on air quality. The other one is on biodiversity net gain, and that's going to be a new planning condition for England, and that is around requiring developers to submit a biodiversity net gain plan pre and post development. And it's effectively, developments are going to have to deliver a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain, which will be maintained for 30 years. So, that can be an on-site or off-site solution, but it kind of links back to what I was saying about some of the nature-based open space areas that we're seeing investment interest in. Developers are going to have to get their head around valuing some of this stuff in a slightly different way, certainly on what's called a natural capital model, and there is going to be the requirement for this sort of effectively nature net gain to be built into new developments. So, that they're going to be new legally binding areas coming into sort of the planning system around air quality and biodiversity, which we haven't really had before. We've had bits and pieces of it, but that is going to be significant. You put that together also with the recent announcement, was it back end of last week or this week, around the MEES change for EPC Band C 2025 for new tenancies, and existing 2028. You can see a sort of a circle of some quite hard legal obligations coming through, and I don't expect that to change really. I say from where we sit, we expect the law to kind of harden it in this area. The government have got the bit between its teeth, and as I said, quite importantly, there is now the capital coming out of the city to really deploy a lot of this. You know, kind of you've got the funding and you've got the legal position all kind of coalescing in one place. So that is a really quick introduction to where we're currently seeing, I guess, the sustainability trends in the market, and you know, a little bit of a focus on the environment bill. I'll now hand over to John, and sorry, John could pick up where he left off, to talk a little bit more deeply about some of the decarbonisation in construction.
Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to hopefully seamlessly jump back to where we left off, and I just want to set out the UK Green Building Council definitions here, just so that it's clear what we're talking about in terms of net zero carbon for construction. So that's the amount of carbon emissions associated with the building's product and construction stages up to PC. Is zero or negative through the use of offsets like Matt's just mentioned, or the net export of on-site renewables. And net zero carbon operational energy is the, as set out there, the carbon emissions associated with the operational energy on an annual basis is zero or negative. A net zero carbon building will be highly energy efficient and powered from on-site and or off-site renewable energy sources, with remaining carbon balance being offset. I've put a link up on the previous slide to a report. It's around 50 pages, but anyone interested in it, it is worth looking at in some detail, because it really sets the scene for where things are going. And while setting out the landscape, I just wanted to briefly touch on perhaps some potential opportunities within the build to rent sector in particular, which may lend itself to decarbonisation. So in terms of exploring greener ways of construction, the benefit of the key stakeholders in the build to rent sector, then both in terms of MMC, bringing swifter construction timeframes, earlier income streams, longer term investment value, so looking to invest in secure and future proof assets. And as Matt just said, there's certainly been a big shift towards what investors are looking for in this particular area, and of course reduced operational costs in the long term as a sort of selling point. Occupier demand will also drive the change, so with more awareness and education around climate change and well-being will of course become greater expectation, and it will be for developers and operators to satisfy that demand in the years ahead. We've acted on a number of build to rent development schemes with substantial off-site construction elements. And I will come on to quite quickly a student accommodation university redevelopment scheme that we acted on last year that I personally worked on and battled through a sort of fairly close negotiation on the security package for a £35 million element of off-site manufacture. So I can give you some insight into what the issues and how to hopefully overcome them. I'll whiz through the next couple of slides. I'm conscious of time, but I couldn't talk about sustainability in construction without touching on materials and methods. So in terms of materials, the big focus at the moment is on embodied carbon, and that's the greenhouse gases that arise from the energy and industrial processes used in the processing of the materials and components required to construct a building. It's becoming a key focus in material selection and structural design. Concrete everywhere has an extremely high embodied carbon factor because of the intense carbon emitting process to make the Portland cement that's in there. I think an interesting sort of point to take away is cement's actually the source of around 8% of the world's total carbon dioxide emissions, according to the think tank Chatham House. So in terms of some context there, if the cement industry were a country, it would be the third largest emitter in the world, behind China and the US. It contributes more CO2 than aviation fuel, and is not far behind the global agricultural business, and that's cement alone. So replacing cement with supplemental cementous materials like fly ash, it will go a long way to reduce the embodied carbon content on a construction project. To achieve the ambitious targets in the UK, at least, closer attention will need to be paid to this and the selection of materials. I haven't got time. I've got to go into too much detail, further detail, but it is a very interesting area. The circular economy. Also, we've all heard of the circular economy as well, and we need to apply that mentality to the circular built environment, it can assist in the net zero transition with a new report I've put up on there, issued very recently, supported by AECOM, stating that carbon reductions of up to 50% can be delivered and 35 billion generated for UK economy by using closed loop materials through the design process for infrastructure projects. They say a shift moves us beyond the extractive linear system and offers a systemic response to the climate change crisis by reducing emissions and increasing resilience. The latest white paper from the Major Infrastructure Resource Optimization Group, or MIROG for short, draws together some of the key themes on previous leadership around how circular economy approaches are a vital ingredient to deliver net zero. Whilst we don't have time to go through any detail, please do check the link provided. It encourages consultants, contractors, suppliers, the whole supply chain to rethink their business models, to think beyond simply creating and delivering assets, and to consider the business opportunities that exist within the following 4 themes: build nothing, build less, build clever, and build efficiently. As illustrated in the carbon reduction curve on the next slide. So this plots the carbon reduction potential on the y-axis against the various stages of development on the x-axis. Intuitively, and focusing on build clever and build efficiently, as I'm a construction lawyer and want to see things built, but applying the circular economy thinking, the earlier the clever decisions are made around reducing the carbon impact of the development, i.e. in the planning and design stage, around optimizing form and using less material with consideration to the transport and movement of materials. And the sooner we embrace the new technologies to help optimize efficiencies, the better. Talking about efficiencies and moving on swiftly to methods and MMC, I tuned in a few weeks ago, and I know we're all aware of MMC. In particular, modular construction is certainly a hot topic and is being deployed across a number of projects across the industry, set to only increase rapidly in the next few years, I'd say. It was good to hear my colleague Rob Ajetti of OC and the consultant at Acolog's views on it a few weeks ago, when they discussed the insurer's approach to modular risk and potential capacity and commitment issues. What they didn't touch on, and something I wanted to explore further, was a very key element, and that's obviously fundability in terms of sticking funds into these projects and what they're going to be looking for. So how do you get Mr. Funder comfortable, contractually speaking, with sinking millions into offsite manufacturing? Firstly, I think we need to just have a look at, is it better for the environment? Back to basics. And I think the answer is yes, shortly. It's more sustainable because factories can control the energy and emissions more easily than construction sites can. A number of offsite manufacturers are using and looking at renewable energy sources to power their assembly plants. Whilst the construction sites have made strides forward in recent years in reducing waste and recycling, factories are still, it's considered much better to able to reduce waste and recycle unused materials than on site. I've been on a few sites using on-site construction, and there's an image up there which I'll come on to in a second. They generally seem a lot tidier, and there's less waste coming out of the process, as you would think. There's less local disruption, obviously, and although transportation, I think, has been argued as almost a case against, there's no evidence that environmental impact is greater than all the white vans attending post traditional construction sites. So is it sustainable? I think so, yes. And apart from the further considerations to take into account around risk, cash flow, insurability, capacity, and
we seem to have lost Jonathan temporarily. Matt, are you able to take over from Jonathan?
Well, no.
Well,
That's a short answer. Let's see if he comes back.
Okay.
He's just messaged me to say his system has gone down.
Okay. In the meantime, we do have a question there.
Okay, let's do that. If there's some questions, let's pick those up.
Well, the first question posed by Tarek has been: should there be one framework that the whole of the built environment, including real estate, should adopt? If so, is there one that you have in mind that the panel that you'd recommend?
Sorry, David, I was just messaging Jonathan there. Sorry, do you mind repeating that?
Okay, yeah. Should there be a single framework that the whole of the built environment, including real estate, should adopt? If so, which one would you recommend?
In terms of if the question is around a legal framework, it would be lovely if it was as neat and tidy as that, but it will never be like that. Unfortunately, it's gonna the kind of legal obligations around sustainability are going to be coming at companies from all different angles. It's going to be coming through the planning process. It's going to be coming through primary legislation. There's going to be guidance. There's going to be what the government have tried to do last year was the year before they launched their 25-year environment plan, which does bring a lot of things together. And I think that's the idea of the environment bill, that there will be from this a more consolidated framework of law. But and actually, with now that we're not going to be in the EU, it might be that the government can kind of bring things together a little bit more. But my sense is, sadly, it is going to be a little bit of everything. It's going to be coming from different directions. I still think predominantly the key area will be through the planning process. I think that's where a lot of the hard regulation will come. So in a sense, that's helpful because it will, a lot of things will be enforced by pre-development planning conditions, as they have been traditionally through, classic things like remediation and contamination. So yeah, stuff on biodiversity and air quality, and as they have been previously with renewables as well. So I think the planning system is where a lot of it will come through, but there is still going to be other things coming out of different places, unfortunately.
Okay. I think, could I move on from that to touch on one other subject you talked about? You started talking about green leases and the difficulty of getting those in place.
Yeah.
It seems to me you're right that the planning cycle is crucial, but there's also the obligations on tenants, particularly in the commercial sector as well. And then perhaps beyond that is also the question of green accounting. How do investors account for all of this stuff? And those seem to be the framework that you need to put in top of the law stuff. And I don't know what your experience of how those things are moving.
Yeah, no, I think that is the $64 million question: is how do you value a portfolio? How do you benchmark? Do you benchmark it by asset class? And I really do think, funnily enough, I had a conversation a couple of weeks with some investment directors at one of the big investment funds on the real estate side, and that was something they're grappling with, particularly where you've got assets across different jurisdictions as well, and there isn't a stable universal methodology of how you determine one building to be more sustainable than the other. And obviously you've got to consider things like John was talking around in terms of the right from the embodied carbon in the construction phase. But I think there is a massive gap in the market for that kind of uniformity to come through. I think it will come through, and I think it will come through, Dave, because the funders will demand it, because then there needs to be a kind of, not an apple and pears situation in terms of how you're pricing, valuing an investment opportunity. So I think there'll be a shaping of that, a coming together of, EPCs are kind of, they're just looking at quite a narrow thing, aren't they? And they've done a job, but actually, when we're looking at sustainability now, it's so much broader than that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And the investor drive is one crucial one. And I think about all the benchmarking for sustainability, that it was only when investors started getting behind GRESB that you saw people taking it, operators and developers taking it seriously.
I agree.
So there's that. I think the other piece is going to be consumer demand and how that affects what we do, and how you translate what we think is right to the consumer demand into actual effective demand that then feeds through to the development cycle. But look, those are questions I'd love to pick up and explore further at the end. In the meantime, let's go back to Jonathan before we.
I will just say, just to pick up one quick point you mentioned, I do think that's why I mentioned COVID, and I do think. Yeah. I don't think we should underestimate the impact of consumer demand in relation to COVID and how people's lifestyles are changing. So and the demand for more open space. So, John, you're back.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on with IT this morning, but there we are. We're here now.
Good job you're not IT lawyers, isn't it?
Are the slides still up?
No, you'll need to reshare your screen, Jonathan.
Okay, I'm just trying that now. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. Is there a way of?
Yeah, I will enable it.
Thank you.
Let me do that. I will enable it.
I try that.
There you go. That should work. So you should be able to do share screen now. Yep, that's
back up. All right, excellent. Okay, so I was just talking about whether we think offsite in the first case is more sustainable or not, for the reasons stated. I think it is. And before I go through some of the sort of key legal considerations to take into account if you're already looking to include substantial offsite element to your projects, I just wanted to share a recent NHBC update on the topic of MC, which will hopefully help enable offsite content. So they've introduced a new MMC acceptance service in July. So last month, no, a few months now, let me say. But they say the service is dedicated to the rapidly growing area of MMC, and the idea is that it's there to support such. They've already reviewed and assessed and accepted nearly 50 systems, apparently, and it sounds like a very positive step towards growing confidence in the area of developers, investors, lenders alike, and of course homeowners who will get the benefit of the NHBC warranty arising out of the use of the systems. So that's positive to see. And in terms of some personal experience, then the image up on the screen there, that's at York University, and we acted for the consortium on this development. It's a 130 mil development, 1,400 bed student accommodation and other campus facilities. The offsite element was, I think, believed between 30 to 35 mil. So it was important that we got the security package right. And the key elements of this development included modular external sandwich panels, prefabricated steel bathroom pods, and pre-assembled distribution racks. And actually, as of this week, on Tuesday, Graham's have completed the first block in just 26 days using MMC, which is quite remarkable, I think. And it's looking very neat and tidy indeed. In terms of the legal considerations then, because I want to go through some lawyery points with you, unfortunately, but it might be helpful to go through some of the legal issues we came across in relation to the offsite element. And these really emanate from cash flow for offsite modular, one such example where risks need to be reconsidered. So the traditional way of cash flow being organised in UK construction projects is that the contractor will be paid by the employer each month based on a valuation of the work done. Obviously, that's different in this area. So where a significant amount of the work is manufactured off-site, the off-site contractor typically requires a large payment in advance of delivery to the site to provide it with the capital to set up the manufacturing process and construct and store the off-site materials. So the payment in advance of work being done increases the risk profile, as you can imagine, for the employers and the funders, where funders are involved. So looking at some of the measures then that can be adopted to help alleviate such risks, mitigate such risks, you've got obviously increased due diligence. So given many of the risks will be around off-site manufacturers becoming insolvent, for example, and suppliers, greater due diligence is required to be performed to establish the health of the main players in the supply chain. As well as the increased due diligence, it's advisable to undertake a market level assessment to see if a replacement can be brought in. Should the manufacturer you're going with not be able to satisfy the order. And in terms of some specific contractual provisions then, it's really around ownership. So you need to include clear provisions as to ownership and storage of materials and to a robust inspection regime. Contracts should expressly state that ownership transfers to the employer on payment for the materials, irrespective of the fact that the goods still may remain off-site. That's to avoid any conclusion that such goods do not belong to the employer. And once materials come on site and are to land, and ownership will transfer to the employer anyway, so the position's slightly clearer at that point. In terms of what's happening in the industry, we're finding that a lot of the main players are quite insistent on using their own terms of engagement. So negotiations with them to a degree are suitably amended. Subcontract can be difficult, but need to be put in place to get the protections needed. We had quite a battle on the project mentioned. In terms of in storage and inspection then, so you need to include rights for the employer to inspect any such storage arrangements. And these clauses need to be included, and monitoring, of course, of the provisions and the equipment itself could be more challenging where it's based overseas. Payment being the big risk, there are certain steps that can be taken. You could look at opening up a project bank account so that there's more monitoring over the levels of sums being transferred. Under the traditional structure, the employer transfers certified sums to the contractor directly, who in turn passes it on to any relevant subcontractor, which can create some problems in the site of off-site technologies, as the employer has limited control over whether the payments to the manufacturers off-site, which are obviously very significant, have in fact been made by the contractor. So it'd be worth looking at a project bank account arrangement in that guise. In terms of de-risking payments, then the use of advance payments can be de-risked by avoiding part payments for manufactured goods. You can also look at including vesting certificates. So this will clarify the employer's ownership of the off-site material to be procured from the supplier, which provides written confirmation that the terms of the contract have been adhered to. And these will set out the ownership of the off-site materials is then transferred as required. In terms of bonds and guarantees, so parent company guarantees and bonds, if you're involved in construction, I'm sure you're well familiar with them, and they're commonplace on all projects, but you can look at some specific bonding for off-site elements, including advance payment bonds, to allow an employer to recover advance payments made to a contractor from the issuer should the contractor fail to deliver the materials, or the supplier fail to deliver the materials in accordance with the contract. And off-site materials bonds, it's a form of advance payment bond linked to the off-site materials, and the value of the bond corresponds to the value of the off-site materials and reduces as and when the materials are brought on site. Unlike the protections mentioned previously, they center around ownership of the material. Advance payment bonds protect the payments made by the employer rather than the goods which were purchased. So there's a plethora of instruments, shall we say, that can be used to help alleviate the risk issues. And I'm going to whip through onto obviously the typical lawyery line that, you know, particular measures will have to be considered on a project by project basis. And looking at design quickly, then I'm just conscious of time. I've set out here a number of design features that should help achieve the sort of zero carbon manifesto. I'm not going to have time to go through them, but you have the slides on those. The point around measurement, I think, is a key one, and moving swiftly on. This is around the myriad of existing and emerging sustainability standards and codes. A major focus on improving long-term sustainability of built assets is requiring a shift away from purely targeting the delivery of the built asset towards a design for performance. Digital tools and modeling can be used to generate algorithms to optimize performance, and the whole digital twin, which is content of a whole other talk, will help in that pursuit. The standards that are currently being deployed that we come across are BREEAM, Passive House, SAP, relating to Part L of the regulations, and the future development of SAP is likely to include consideration of feed-in tariffs and inclusion of on-site and off-site measures to mitigate carbon emissions to satisfy the zero carbon targets. LEED and WELL is another one on wellness with some overlap to BREEAM. There is a more recent Better Building Partnership Design for Performance initiative that has sparked a lot of interest, and I believe members of the group will be familiar with that. It's an industry-backed project to tackle the performance gap and provide an approach based on measurable performance outcomes to ensure new developments deliver the design intent. And that's really the message to take away from this bit, is that there needs to be a shift away from just getting the rubber stamp approval on delivery and looking further into the future, which will come into the talk around modifications as well, contract modifications. ESG factors and decarbonisation. So it was mentioned briefly earlier by Matt. I think the key point is just that, you know, in terms of enabling change, now is a great opportunity for building owners, investors and asset managers and all others involved to take steps towards understanding the asset performance. And in terms of investability, these issues are very live. Not only are traditional financial metrics reported and utilised, but also metrics explicitly linked to climate-related risk, responsible investment strategies and well-being, and a much more holistic view is being taken, which is a driver, really a top-down driver for the change. I've seen this firsthand on a recent project where the fund behind 100 mil plus development we were working on asked our client, the developer, expressly what features of the development could apply to the ESG rating, and were asked to complete and submit a very detailed questionnaire and analysis, which included an examination around the key design features of the proposed development, which are intended to make it sustainable. So it is happening, and we'll see more of it. And it's good to see such metrics in operation. I haven't got time to go through the next piece in any detail around policy. I did want to, but we'll be more than happy to go to if we get another chance. What I'd like to finish on really is areas of action as I've seen them set out there. These are around identifying key actions as we work towards a decarbonised built environment. I won't read through them. We'll quickly jump on to a very interesting project I wanted to share with you, and this is around the sort of potential green modifications piece. At OC, obviously, clearly we've got a long-standing interest in sustainability and our own decarbonisation initiative, which Matt mentioned. Many of the contracts we're involved in already include a significant element of contractual forethought on and around enabling decarbonisation, and we're likely to only see more. A great project that we're involved with and have gleaned some useful information from, and the slide is up, the link is up on there to take a look at. It's some really interesting and quite radical and challenging material is in the playbook that they've offered. It's arisen out of a pro bono input from a range of legal professionals, with the aim of creating better contracts, not just in construction, but throughout the commercial practice, to help tackle climate change across a number of areas. Provide some great examples of the types and changes we might see in the near future. It's been very well put together, albeit it's one that all will need to use and adapt with some caution and great care, because it is, you know, asking the market to take on board some of these changes, quite fundamental changes, will be a big ask. So just quickly then, looking at the green modifications, then these provisions will essentially incentivize building contractors to propose green modifications to the project works to benefit the employer, the overall project and the environment. And they look to tie in incentives of providing a greener solution to long-term reduced energy costs of the completed project and to green financing, where in principle employers could benefit from reduced long-term energy consumption, emission financing costs as may be applicable. In terms of green design and construction standards then, in terms of revising the standard of care to not only adhere to best industry practice, but to also ensure that the project meets the green objectives, which will be defined upon completion and into the future. So the project's capable of withstanding climate risks which may arise and impact the project. I did want to take you through what these modifications may actually look like, but you've got the slide, so I'll leave you to have a look through them. The upshot is that the process would involve the contractor making its modification proposals, including an assessment on programme and cost, both of which could go up or down, and the employer reviews those proposals and then responds with the elements they're willing to accept and elements they need to reject on a time cost basis. And the green objectives which is the last slide, is around maximising the use of sustainability in the construction phase, the use of materials, as we discussed, with lower embodied carbon, and minimising emissions, harmful materials, use of water, and in relation to the employer's circumstances, maximising the prospect of them reaching their net zero target. And in relation to occupation, operation and utilisation of the project in its operating life, minimising emissions, maximising efficiency, maximising resilience. The contractual processes here include the obligations as set out as at practical completion, and potentially even beyond that. Obviously, that would be a bit more onerous, and some care and thought will need to be considered around that. Overall, we certainly expect some resistance in the short term to such changes, but as things develop and we all move forward with the initiative, provided that policy and investment support the transition, we can hopefully seek to include similar obligations in construction contracts and throughout the supply chain, and for want of a better word, they may become the new normal. I can almost hear the yawns having gone into a bit too much detail around the legal contractual examples there, but that was a quick run through. I hope it was interesting and thought-provoking. Apologies for the gremlins, not our fault, but on our watch, so apologies for that. And Matt and I would be, we'd welcome any further questions. Back to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm very conscious it's 11 o'clock. So although we have some really great questions in, we don't have time to answer them today. We also had a question about will the slides be available. So just to make sure people are aware, we'll be happy to send out the slides to all the attendees. And I think Matt and Jonathan will review the questions, and where possible, they'll come back and provide an answer to those.
We will do that, yeah, we will do that.
Okay, so I'd just finally like to say thank you to everybody for attending. It's great, and thank you to Matt and Jonathan for leading today's session. I do hope the gremlins didn't upset the experience for you. I just like to finish by saying, as I say, the recording will be available on our website in a day or so. The next event in the UKA's programme of webinars is next Tuesday, and it's called Living in the Next Normal. Interesting title. It's actually about a piece of research that's been done by some interesting organisations into consumers' experience during lockdown and what the implications of that are in terms of trends and thoughts for the next phase of design, the next normal. The big trends that you can't afford to ignore. After that, on the 14th, there's actually a major industry event. We've got the launch of the Build to Rent Hub, which is a single website where lots of information about Build to Rent will be available from one point. That's being hosted by the BPF, and we're launching the hub in connection with BPF and CREFC Europe, their Real Estate Funding Council. And then finally, on Thursday, the 22nd, we've got another webinar presented by Smart Rent on about the only thing your tech stack is missing is the real estate. So we're picking up there tech, spreading information, future thinking and sustainability. And those will be key themes for the UK Festival of Build to Rent, which is happening on November the 16th to 20th. I'm sure all of you have been bombarded with emails from us. There'll be lots more coming out, and we really would encourage you to join. Discounted prices at the moment. I think 25% off if you register the next week or so. It'll be a great session, and I think just to give you a taster, we've just announced that we'll be doing 3 virtual study tours during the course of the festival. Angel Gardens in Moda, which I know Moda are huge in terms of thinking about sustainability, and Black Horse Mills in Walthamstow, and West Tower in Manchester, the 60-storey tower that you may have seen featured in Mantopia recently. So anyway, look, I won't take up too much more of your time. Just to say thank you once again. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody who's joined us. It's been a really fascinating topic. It's one I could talk about or I could ask questions about all day. And no doubt we'll return to it soon. So thank you once again. Cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thank you.